September 15, 1916. A German machine gunner sits in his trench near the village of Flers on the Somme. He's been here for months. His position is impregnable. Barbed wire stretches for hundreds of yards in front of him. His machine gun can fire 600 rounds per minute. No infantry can cross this killing ground. Then, through the morning fog, he sees something impossible. Something that shouldn't exist. A massive iron monster, 30 feet long, 8 feet tall, moving at walking speed directly toward him. It looks like a giant metal box on tracks. He's never seen anything like it. Nobody has. He opens fire. His bullets spark off the metal hide. The thing doesn't stop. Doesn't even slow down. It rolls over his barbed wire like it's grass. It's heading straight for his trench. Then it does something that makes his blood run cold. It drives over the trench itself, right over his head. Tracks grinding on both sides of the trench as this steel beast passes above him like a bridge of iron and death. German soldiers all along the line are throwing down their weapons and running. Running from something they've never seen before. Something that changes everything they know about warfare. This is September 15th, 1916. The first time tanks were ever used in combat. The day warfare changed forever. The day the stalemate of trench warfare began to crack. This is the story of the weapon that shocked the world, and the Germans who ran from it in terror. The Somme, September 1916. For 3 months, British and French forces have been throwing themselves against German defenses. 3 months of the most horrific fighting in human history. Over 500,000 casualties on both sides. And the front line has barely moved. The problem is simple and seemingly unsolvable. Machine guns and barbed wire have made defense so powerful that offense is nearly impossible. You can't advance across no man's land without being cut down. Artillery doesn't destroy the wire, it just tangles it worse. Every attack ends the same way. Thousands dead, a few hundred yards gained at most. Then pushed back, Captain D.E. Hickey, a British infantry officer, described the situation in his memoir published in 1933. He wrote, "We all knew we were going to die. It was just a question of when. You'd go over the top, run maybe 20 yards before the machine guns opened up. Then you'd be on the ground bleeding out or already dead. The next wave would do the same, and the next. The Germans didn't even have to aim carefully. They just swept their guns back and forth." Reference Hickey. Douillet rolling into action. Hutchinson, 1933, page 34. Hickey was a tank officer who later wrote one of the first-hand accounts of tank warfare. But in September 1916, something new is coming to the Somme. Something the Germans have never seen. Something British military planners have been developing in complete secrecy for over a year. They call them tanks, a deliberate deception. When workers built them in factories, they were told they were making mobile water tanks for Mesopotamia. The name stuck, but these are not water tanks. These are armored fighting vehicles, land battleships, iron monsters designed to do one thing: break the stalemate of trench warfare. And on September 15, 1916, they're about to be used in combat for the very first time in human history. To understand why tanks were revolutionary, you need to understand just how impossible the Western Front had become by. The Battle of the Somme began on July 1, 1916. The British plan was straightforward: massive artillery bombardment for a week to destroy German defenses. Then infantry would walk across no man's land and occupy the destroyed trenches. It was catastrophic. On the first day, July 1, 1916, the British Army suffered 57,470 casualties, nearly 20,000 killed in a single day. The worst day in British military history. Reference: British Official History of the War. Military Operations, France and Belgium, 2016. Volume 1, compiled by Brigadier General Sir James Edmonds. 32. This is the official British government record. Private George Coppard, who survived the first day, wrote in his memoir years later, "I watched the British advance. Neat lines of men walking toward German trenches. Then the machine guns opened up. Men just fell in rows, like someone had scythed them down. The whole line just dropped. Then the next wave went over. Same result. I couldn't believe we kept sending men over." Reference: Coppard, George. "With a machine gun to Cambrai. Imperial War Museum, 1969, page 67. Barbed's memoir is considered one of the most honest accounts of trench warfare. The week-long artillery bombardment had failed to destroy German defenses. The Germans had built deep bunkers, some 30 feet underground. The artillery created thousands of shell craters but didn't kill the defenders. When the bombardment lifted, German soldiers emerged from their bunkers, set up their machine guns, and mowed down the advancing British infantry. Why couldn't the British just bombard the Germans into submission? Because the scale of defense was unprecedented. A typical German defensive sector in 1916 included multiple trench lines, 325 lines deep, each 200-300 yards apart, thick belts of barbed wire, often 30 yards deep, concrete bunkers, and dugouts, pre-sighted machine gun positions, covering every approach artillery support from behind the lines. Attacking this was suicide. But continuing the battle was strategic necessity. The French were being bled white at Verdun. The Somme was meant to relieve pressure on them by forcing Germany to divert forces. So the attacks continued. July, August, September. Each attack the same. Artillery bombardment, infantry assault, horrific casualties, minimal gain. Lieutenant Ernst Junger, a German officer defending at the Somme, later wrote in his memoir, Storm of Steel, published in 1920, about watching British attacks. He wrote this: "They came in waves. Brave men walking upright into machine gun fire. We killed them by the hundreds. I felt no triumph, only horror at the slaughter. Our machine gunners were sick with it. You'd fire until the gun was hot, and then you'd look and see the ground carpeted with bodies." Reference: Junger. Ernst, Storm of Steel, originally published. 1920. Junger was one of Germany's most decorated soldiers, and his memoir is considered a classic of war. Literature. By September 1916, British commanders were desperate for a solution. They'd tried everything. Longer artillery bombardments didn't work. Night attacks still got massacred. Different infantry tactics made no difference. Poison gas, wind-dependent. Unreliable, nothing worked. Machine guns and barbed wire were simply too powerful. Then someone suggested, what if we could protect the infantry while they crossed no man's land? What if we could build an armored vehicle that bullets couldn't penetrate, that could crush barbed wire, that could cross trenches? The idea wasn't new. H.G. Wells had written about land ironclads in a short story back in 1903. But making it real? That was the challenge. Reference: Wells, The Land Ironclads, originally published in the Strand magazine, December 1903. Wells's fictional armored vehicles featured many elements later incorporated into actual tanks, and in September 1916, that challenge was about to be answered. The tank was born from desperation and brilliant innovation. In 1915, Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, became obsessed with breaking the trench stalemate. He established the Landships Committee to develop armored vehicles. The name Landships revealed the thinking. If the Navy had armored vessels that could withstand gunfire, why not create armored land vessels? Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Swinton, a British Army engineer, wrote a memorandum in October 1914, just months into the war, proposing exactly this idea. He'd observed the stalemate developing and proposed an armored vehicle on caterpillar tracks, capable of crossing trenches and crushing wire, armed with machine guns or light cannons, protecting a crew inside. Reference: Swinton Ernest. Eyewitness: Hodder and Stoughton, 1932, page 156. Swinton was one of the fathers of the tank and later wrote extensively about its development. The technical challenges were enormous. Engine needed enough power to move several tons of armor tracks. Had to work on muddy, cratered ground armor, thick enough to stop bullets, light enough to move. Weapons needed to fire while moving. Trench crossing had to span 8-foot-wide trenches. The solution was the Mark I tank, designed by William Foster and Coers in Lincoln, England. The specifications were revolutionary for 1916 length 32 feet, needed to span trenches. Width 14 feet, height 8 feet, weight 28 tons, armor 12mm, steel plate, stopped rifle and machine gun fire, speed 3.7. Your maximum walking pace. Crew 8 men, commander. Driver 2 gearsmen, 4 gunners. Armament: either 2 6-pounder guns, male tank, or 5 machine guns, female tank. Reference: Fletcher. DVD British Mark I tank 1916. Osprey Publishing 2004. Page 8. Technical specifications from official War Office documents. Why male and female? The male tanks had the heavier guns for destroying fortifications. Female tanks had only machine guns and were meant to suppress infantry. The names came from the difference in armament. Contemporaries made analogies to male and female birds with different features. The tank was absolutely miserable to operate inside. Captain D.E. Hickey, who commanded a tank, described the interior conditions. Temperature inside reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine noise was deafening. You communicated by hand signals or shouting directly in someone's ear. Fumes from the engine filled the crew compartment, and regularly passed out from heat and carbon monoxide. The suspension was non-existent. You were thrown around constantly, and if a bullet hit the armor, red-hot metal fragments would spray inside, blinding or injuring crew members. Reference: Hickey, Rolling into Action. Page 45. Despite these problems, the tank worked. In trials, it crushed barbed wire effortlessly. It crossed trenches that would stop any wheeled vehicle. Bullets bounced off the armor. By September 1916, 49 tanks had been built and shipped to France. Crews trained in secret. The Germans knew nothing about them. General Sir Douglas Haig, commander of British forces, wanted to use them immediately at the Somme. Tank advocates begged him to wait, build more tanks, train crews better, plan a massive surprise attack. Haig refused. He wanted to use them now. Even a few tanks might make a difference. Major General J.F.C. Fuller, who later became one of the world's foremost tank warfare theorists, criticized this decision in his 1928 book. He wrote, Haig threw away the element of surprise. We had 49 tanks. We should have waited until we had 500. Instead, we revealed the weapon to the Germans before we could exploit it properly. Reference: Fuller. EFAC. Tanks in the Great War, 1914-1918. John Murray, 1920. Page 89. Fuller was a tank officer and later military historian. But Haig's mind was made up. The tanks would attack on September 15, 1916, supporting an infantry assault near the village of Flers. 49 tanks were available. Of those, 32 made it to the starting positions. 7 broke down before the battle even started. The remaining 32 tanks, divided into small groups, would support infantry across a 6-mile front. It was hardly the massed tank assault Fuller envisioned, but it was about to shock the German army to its core. The German reaction to tanks went through 3 distinct phases: disbelief, panic, then adaptation. Phase 1, disbelief, September 15, 16, and 16. German High Command initially dismissed early reports of tanks as exaggerated or confused accounts. General Erich Ludendorff, Germany's de facto military leader, wrote in his post-war memoir, "When we first received reports of armored vehicles crossing trenches, I thought the reports were hysteria from stressed frontline troops. Armored cars existed, but something that could cross trenches? It seemed impossible." Reference: Ludendorff. Erich, My War Memories, 1914-1918. Hutchinson, 1919, Volume 2, page 276. Ludendorff's memoir was published immediately after the war, but the reports kept coming, and they were consistent. Frontline units described armored vehicles impervious to rifle and machine gun fire vehicles that crossed trenches and crushed barbed wire soldiers fleeing in panic, multiple defensive positions overrun. When German intelligence examined captured tanks and interviewed captured British tank crews, the reality became clear. The British had developed a new weapon. Phase 2, panic, September-October 1916. German morale took a significant hit. The psychological impact of tanks was enormous. A German military intelligence report from October 1916, captured after the war, stated, "The effect on troop morale is considerable. Soldiers who have faced the British tanks report feeling helpless. Standard weapons are ineffective. The noise and appearance of the machines creates terror in inexperienced troops. Several units have broken and fled when tanks appeared. Reference: German Military Intelligence Assessment. October 1916, captured documents, National Archives, 157-21, German. Commanders circulated instructions on how to fight. Tanks aim for vision slits and observation ports use armor-piercing bullets. If available, call for artillery support immediately. Don't. Panicked tanks can be stopped, but these instructions couldn't eliminate fear. Lieutenant Friedrich Steinbrecher, a German artillery officer, wrote in his diary, "The men call them Panzerwagen, armored cars, but they're more like mobile forts. Our infantry is terrified of them. You can see it in their eyes when they hear tank engines. Some would rather face a bombardment than a tank attack." Reference: Steinbrecher Diary. October 1916. Published in German Students' War Letters, edited by Philip Whitkop, 1929. Page 302. Phase 3, Adaptation, late 1916-1917. The Germans couldn't build tanks quickly. They lacked the industrial capacity and resources. But they could develop countermeasures, armor-piercing ammunition. German arms manufacturers developed the SMK bullet, steel-cored armor-piercing rounds that could penetrate tank armor at close range. These were issued to machine gun crews and designated marksmen. Reference: German Army Weapons Development Records. Analyzed in Zabecki, David. The German 1918 Offensives. Routledge. Dunix, page 187. Anti-tank tactics. Position field guns for direct fire at tanks dig deeper trenches, wider than 10 feet, that tanks couldn't cross. Create tank graps. Concealed pits that tanks would fall into, train infantry to attack. Tanks at close range with grenades. German tank development. Germany began designing its own tank, the A7V. But German tanks wouldn't appear in numbers until 1918, and they'd never match British or French production. The German approach revealed their strategic situation. They were reacting, not innovating. Britain had the initiative. By early 1917, British tank tactics were evolving rapidly. Use tanks in larger groups, massed formations. Better mechanical reliability. Mark IV tank introduced. Coordinate tanks with infantry and artillery. Choose ground carefully. Avoid heavily cratered terrain. The lessons of September 15, 1916, were being learned and applied. But the ultimate test of tank warfare was still to come. The Battle of Cambrai, November 1917, where tanks would be used en masse for the first time. September 15, 1916, 6:20 a.m., the whistle blows. The attack begins. 32 tanks lurch forward toward German lines. The noise is incredible, engines roaring, tracks clanking, steel grinding on steel. Each tank crawls at walking pace, followed by infantry who've been told these land ships will protect them. Second Lieutenant Stuart Hasty commanded a Mark I tank that day. In his after-action report, he described the start of the attack. "We advanced through our own barbed wire. The tank simply rolled over it, crushing it flat. I looked back and saw infantry following in the path we'd cleared. They were actually cheering. For the first time on the Somme, they weren't being slaughtered crossing no man's land." Reference: Hasty, Stuart. Tank Corps Action Report, September 16, 1916. National Archives, Jurivtod 91. These are the official reports filed immediately after the battle. The German reaction was exactly what the British hoped for: complete shock. Wiesefeldwebel August Hopp, a German NCO, later described his first sight of a tank in an interview conducted in 1918, while he was a prisoner of war. He said, "We heard engine noise, then saw this thing coming through the mist. I thought it was a building somehow moving. Then I realized it was a machine, a moving fortress. We fired everything at it. Rifles, machine guns. The bullets just bounced off. Then it rolled over our wire like it wasn't even there. Some men ran. I don't blame them. We'd never seen anything like it." Reference: Hop interview. British Intelligence Interrogation Files. October 1918. National Archives. We won 57-16. Not all tanks reached German lines. Of the 32 that started, broke down immediately from mechanical problems, got stuck in muddy shell craters. Several were hit by German artillery, But those that reached German trenches created chaos. Near the village of Flares, a tank designated D1 became famous. It drove straight through the main street of Flares, with German soldiers running ahead of it in panic. A British aircraft observer radioed back, "Tank walking up High Street of Flares with British Army cheering behind." Reference: Royal Flying Corps Reconnaissance Report, September 15, 1916. Official communiqué cited in British official history. This single sentence, published in newspapers, made headlines around the world. The tank had captured public imagination. Captain Hickey, commanding a tank near Goudecourt, described close-quarters combat. "We drove directly at a German machine gun position. They fired continuously at us. I could hear bullets rattling off the armor like hail on a tin roof. We got within 10 yards, then fired our 6-pounder. Direct hit. The position was destroyed. German soldiers in nearby trenches were surrendering, hands up, absolutely terrified of us." Reference: Hickey, Rolling into Action, page 78. But tanks weren't invincible. German field artillery, firing at close range, could punch through the armor. Tank D-17 was hit by a German 70mm artillery shell. The explosion killed 3 crew members instantly and set the tank on fire. Inside the tanks, conditions were hellish. Sergeant Robert Misson described it in his diary. "Temperature must have been 130 degrees. One of our crew fainted from heat and fumes. We had to prop him in a corner and keep fighting. Bullets hitting the armor sent hot metal splinters flying inside, like being inside a bell that's being hit with hammers. My face was covered with small cuts from metal fragments." Reference: Misson Diary. September 15, 1916. Imperial War Museum Documents Collection, Ref 82-3-1. The battle lasted 6 hours. By midday, most tanks had broken down, been knocked out or run out of fuel. But they'd achieved something unprecedented. They'd broken through German defenses with minimal casualties. The results were dramatic. Before tanks, British attacks on the Somme. July-August 1916 average advance. 200-500 yards average casualties. 3,000-8,000 per day success rate. Minimal. Usually pushed back with tanks, September 15th. Advance. Up to 3,500 yards in some sectors casualties. Significantly reduced where tanks led success. Multiple German positions overrun psychological impact. Enormous Private W.H.L. Watson, who followed behind a tank during the attack, wrote in his memoir, "For the first time since I'd come to France, I felt like we had a chance. These machines could do what we couldn't, cross that killing ground and survive. The Germans were running from them. I saw it with my own eyes. These metal monsters scared them more than anything we'd thrown at them." Reference: Watson. Burs, A Company of Tanks. William Blackwood, 1920, page 45. Watson later became a tank officer. But the Battle of September 15th wasn't a complete victory. The tanks were too few, too unreliable, used in too small groups. The British captured ground but couldn't hold it all. German counterattacks pushed them back in some sectors. Yet something fundamental had changed. The tank had proven the concept. Armor could protect against machine guns. Trenches could be crossed. Barbed wire could be crushed. The stalemate could be broken. The Germans were about to learn this lesson the hard way. November 20th, 1917. Cambrai. This is what tank advocates had wanted all along. A massed surprise attack using tanks as the primary weapon. Not just infantry support. The numbers were staggering. Fighting tanks, mostly Mark IV, supporting a 6-mile front, no preliminary artillery bombardment. Complete surprise. Objective: break through German lines. Tank theorist J.F.C. Fuller helped plan the attack. He later wrote, "Finally, we would use tanks as they were meant to be used, en masse as the decisive arm with infantry and artillery supporting them rather than the other way around. This was the birth of modern armored warfare." Reference: Fuller, Tanks in the Great War, page 187. The attack began at 6:20 a.m. A wall of tanks, hundreds of them, rolled forward through morning mist. The noise was like thunder. German defenders who'd been expecting another quiet day were shocked. Lieutenant Gerhard Gertler, defending at Cambrai, described the moment in his memoir. At first we heard engines. Many engines. Then we saw them, tanks as far as we could see, dozens, hundreds, an entire wave of them. Our artillery tried to engage, but there were too many. They just kept coming, crushing our wire, crossing our trenches. My position was overrun in minutes. We couldn't stop them. Reference, Gertler, Gerhard. The Kaiser's Battle, published in German, 1930. English translation, 1968, page 234. In the first day, British forces advanced 5 miles, farther than any attack since 1914. Multiple German defensive lines were breached. It was the most successful British attack of the war. Church bells rang in London to celebrate the victory. Newspapers proclaimed the stalemate broken. The tank had proven itself, but Cambrai also revealed the limits of tank warfare in 1917. The British couldn't exploit the breakthrough. Tanks had limited range. They ran out of fuel. Many broke down German reserves, counterattacked without tanks, which needed refueling and repairs. The British couldn't hold the gains within 2 weeks. The Germans had pushed the British back, covering most of the lost ground. Reference, British official history, military operations, France and Belgium, 917, Volume 3, Cambrai Operations, pages 89–124. But the strategic lesson was clear. Massed tank attacks could break defenses. The technology just needed to improve. By 1918, tanks were transforming warfare. August 8, 1918, the Black Day of the German Army, SFOR. British and French tanks attacked German lines. Collapsed Ludendorff called it the Black Day because so many German soldiers surrendered rather than face tanks, the beginning of the end for Germany. Reference, Ludendorff, My War Memories, Volume 2, page 679. Ludendorff specifically described August 8, 1918, as catastrophic. By November 1918, when the war ended, tanks had evolved. Better reliability, better armor, better tactics, better crew training, and every major military power was developing tanks. The genie was out of the bottle. The Germans learned this lesson painfully. In World War II, Germany would use tanks, called panzers, better than anyone. Blitzkrieg tactics combined massed tanks with aircraft and infantry. The Germans, who'd been shocked by tanks in 1916, became masters of tank warfare by 1940. But it all started on September 15, 1916, when a German soldier looked across no man's land and saw an iron monster rolling toward him through the fog. September 15, 1916. The day everything changed. German soldiers who thought they were safe behind barbed wire and machine guns learned they weren't safe anymore. British infantry who thought crossing no man's land meant certain death found they could survive if iron monsters led the way. The tank wasn't perfect in 1916. It was slow, unreliable, incredibly uncomfortable for crews, and easily stopped by artillery or bad ground. But it proved the concept. Armor could defeat machine guns. Trenches could be crossed. The stalemate could be broken. Within 2 years, tanks would help win World War I. Within 20 years, they'd revolutionize warfare in World War II. Within a century, they'd be the dominant land weapon on every modern battlefield. All because Winston Churchill, Ernest Swinton, and a team of engineers decided to solve an impossible problem. How do you cross a killing ground when machine guns make crossing it suicide? Their answer, you build a moving fortress that bullets can't stop. The Germans were